From Montana's news leader, this is the MTN 10 o'clock news.
Good evening and thanks for joining us tonight. I'm Russ Riesinger. President Joe Biden is moving forth with executive orders that have been getting a lot of attention here in Montana and Wyoming. Tonight, Chief Political Reporter Mike Dennison examines the impacts of one of those environmental orders, a moratorium on oil and gas leasing on federal lands.
Biden's order says no new leases will be issued for oil and gas production on federal lands while the Interior Department reviews the process. Critics have long said the federal government is leasing lands to petroleum producers often at below market prices and favoring oil and gas over other uses for these lands.
We have been leasing public lands for oil and gas development like candy for the last couple years. It's a really good time to take a step back, not just for climate change purposes, but also for water quality purposes.
The industry says the move will eliminate jobs and reduce revenue for states. Republican members of our congressional delegation, Representative Matt Rosendale and Senator Steve Daines, say they'll sponsor legislation to reverse Biden's order, legislation not likely to pass. But let's look more closely at the facts and the numbers behind oil and gas leasing on federal lands in Montana and elsewhere. Nationwide, about 20% of U.S. oil production is off federal land. But in Montana, there's not a single operating oil rig on these federal acres. During the Trump administration, the feds offered up 924 parcels covering 469,000 acres of public lands for oil and gas leasing in Montana and North Dakota. Only 40% of those parcels even received bids, and the total payments over 4 years was about $7 million, half of which goes to the states. In 2020, the total income on these bids was only $600,000 on 46 parcels covering 22,000 acres. A winning bid gives the company 10 years to develop oil and gas on the property. Oil companies with existing federal leases are not affected by the ban and will continue to pay royalties to state and federal governments for any production from federal lands. But as we said, right now, there's no operating oil wells on federal land in Montana. Alan Olson of the Montana Petroleum Association says the lease ban could harm existing production elsewhere if that drilling on private or state lands needs to expand onto federal property.
Are we going to be able to drill even though there's federal mineral acreage in there? Are we going to have to find a way of spacing the federal minerals out and bypassing them?
But Hedges says oil companies already have thousands of leases that they're not using, and that the moratorium won't affect current production much, if at all.
This is not going to impact them, at least in Montana, because they're not producing or moving forward with developing these leases anyway. They've been hoarding these leases, but they've been getting these leases for a song, and we should not be selling public lands for a song.
Hedges Group and several others also filed suit 3 weeks ago to block federal oil and gas leases awarded in Montana and North Dakota since 2018. They say federal officials didn't properly consider the impact of continued oil development on groundwater or the climate. The Biden administration says the moratorium is a pause to examine whether the leasing program should be reformed. But environmentalists clearly hope it will lead to less oil and gas production on federal lands. In Helena, Mike Dennison, MTN News.
And you can check out Mike Dennison's full report on the impacts of halting the Keystone Pipeline and oil and gas leasing on KTVQ.com. Well, 209 additional COVID cases were added to the Yellowstone County totals this week, but that's not cause for alarm. It's mostly old cases that were originally not reported. Now, some of the newly counted cases stretch all the way back to October. Health Officer John Felton said the weekly totals should return to normal next week. When a COVID-19 test comes back from a lab positive, local public health is notified to perform contact tracing, but sometimes those positive cases aren't picked up at the state level. When the 209 additional cases were added last week, it bumped up the average new cases per day to 41 in a 1-week period. But if you take out the reconciled cases, the Yellowstone County numbers are closer to last week at an average of 23 new cases per day in a 1-week period.
And again, this is really a reporting issue. So those when there are positive cases, local public health is notified, and we do the case investigation and contact tracing at that time. So even those cases that just hit this week, they'd already been fully worked up at the time the test was positive. So it doesn't mean that any people weren't taken care of. It's really just an issue of the reporting process that occasionally breaks down, and some of the interfaces occasionally break down.
Felton told Billings City Council tonight that overall cases in January were down from the previous month of December, with 1,100 fewer cases. Well, Yellowstone County health leaders are a bit more pleased this week as the county received 2,500 first doses of COVID-19 vaccine. Both Billings Clinic and St. Vincent received 975 doses, and Riverstone 200. No walk-in COVID-19 vaccinations are being given, so to make an appointment, you can go to this story on KTVQ.com. And even if you have been vaccinated against COVID-19, health experts say you're not immune to a more contagious mutation of the virus. As Q2's Andrea Lutz reports, pathologists at the Billings Clinic are already on high alert to track it.
And we could see another spike in cases.
As cases of the COVID-19 variant close in on Montana, pathologists are actively looking for it. Billings Clinic recently started using a new testing system called TaqPath, yielding results in as little as 24 hours, but also helping to identify a new strain.
Maybe about a month ago or so that the strain became more prevalent.
Dr. Christina Cavern says while there's been no positive cases of the United Kingdom variant yet in Montana, their lab has already sent a dozen tests to the state to get further analysis.
Any test that you get for COVID will include us looking for this variant.
Most people have no idea if they have the variant because symptoms are relatively the same. But there's one very alarming difference.
What the difference is with this UK variant is just that it's more transmissible, it's more contagious.
The CDC says sometimes new variants emerge and disappear. Other times, new variants emerge and persist.
What we want people to know is just to continue with those precautions, even if you've received the vaccine, even if you've already had COVID before.
And for a timeline on when Montana could see the variant?
We were a little bit behind the rest of the country, but once it gets here, it's so contagious, I think that it could really take off. It's probably just a matter of time.
In Billings, Andrea Lutz, MTN News.
Thanks, Andrea. The United Kingdom variant spreads more easily and quickly than other variants. In January of 2021, experts in the UK reported this variant may be associated with an increased risk of death compared to other variant viruses. Today in Helena, the Montana House endorsed a bill meant to protect businesses and others against so-called frivolous lawsuits seeking damages related to COVID-19. The House voted largely along party lines, with Republicans in favor to advance that bill on a 66-33 vote. The bill says anyone suing for damages related to infections from COVID-19 must prove gross negligence, which is a higher standard for the plaintiff in a civil suit. Supporters say the bill is needed to encourage businesses to stay open or reopen without fear of getting sued. Opponents, most of whom were Democrats, say the bill lets businesses evade responsibility for creating a safe workplace for employees. Republican Governor Greg Gianforte says he'll lift the statewide mask mandate once the bill becomes law. The bill faces a final vote tomorrow before advancing to one last vote in the Senate. Well, Senate Republicans say they'll keep working with the Biden administration on a COVID relief package after a nearly 2-hour-long meeting at the White House. Over the weekend, 10 GOP members offered a counter-proposal to the president's plan. The efforts at bipartisanship come as Senate Democrats ramp up their threats to go it alone on the president's proposed $1.9 trillion stimulus package. Skylar Henry is at the White House with the latest.
A group of Republican senators met with President Biden and Vice President Harris at the White House to discuss their $600 billion COVID relief counterproposal.
We have just had a very productive, cordial 2-hour meeting.
Senate Republicans have balked at the $1.9 trillion price tag of President Biden's proposal. Both plans call for $160 billion for COVID vaccine distribution, testing, and PPE supplies. Key differences in the GOP proposal include smaller direct stimulus payments with a lower income cutoff and lower weekly unemployment insurance payments only lasting through June.
It was a very good exchange of views. I wouldn't say that we came together on a package tonight. No one expected that in a 2-hour meeting.
The president has consistently called for bipartisanship in COVID relief negotiations, but the Biden administration also cautions against passing a bill that's too small. On MSNBC, West Virginia's Republican governor also called for a large package.
We need to go big, and if we waste some money now, well, we waste some money. But absolutely, we've got too many people hurting.
Monday, Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer and House Speaker Nancy Pelosi introduced a joint budget resolution on COVID relief.
There is nothing in this process that will preclude it from being bipartisan. We welcome Republican input.
The move could allow President Biden's $1.9 trillion plan to pass the Senate with a simple majority. Skyler Henry, CBS News, the White House.
President Biden's calling for $350 billion in funding for state and local governments in his COVID economic rescue plan, while Senate Republicans have no state and local funding in their proposal. Well, the results are in on a recent downtown Billings traffic survey. Drivers weighed in on possible changes like eliminating many of the one-way streets to make them two-ways. Q2's Mitch Legge joins us from downtown Billings with details.
I'm standing here at the corner of 2nd Avenue North and North 28th Street in downtown Billings, two of the streets that traffic engineers considered in a study to convert from one-way to two-way. Local engineers with the city and Dowell conducted an online survey and received 2,300 users who completed 415 total surveys. The general theme is that about 60% of people were in favor of changing roads in downtown Billings from one-way to two-way. On 2nd and 3rd Avenues North, 65% wanted to see changes to two-way traffic. And in the north-south direction, 61% were in favor of two-way conversion on a majority of the north-south routes pictured here in green. Engineers also looked at the possibility of adding a bike lane to Montana Avenue and reducing traffic to 2 lanes for certain sections of the street. 60% of those surveyed were in favor of the Montana Avenue bike lane. Now, the study was started in June 2019 and cost the city $50,000, 60% of which was paid for with the help of a federal grant. The survey did not take into account any cost estimates for construction. Reporting in Billings, Mitch Legge, MTN News.
All right, turning to Chief Meteorologist Ed McIntosh. And Ed, we were warm today, but we're talking about a possible record high tomorrow.
That's right, quite a few temperatures will be close to record highs. Here's where we ended up today. A lot of 40s and 50s across the region. Right around central Montana, we did hit 61 in Grass Range. But looking into tomorrow, we'll have a little warmer start, and that puts us in the neighborhood of some upper 50s to low 60s. We won't break a lot of records, but we're going to be at least close in lots of areas of eastern Montana and northern Wyoming. Check out Glasgow with a decent chance of close to a record high. Grable, Worland, you're also looking at temperatures well above the seasonal averages. It could break some records tomorrow as well. But no matter what happens with the afternoon readings tomorrow, the cold arrives over the weekend and some snow to go along with it. Details on that coming up in a few minutes.
All right, thank you, Ed. The University of Montana brought its 46th annual Economic Outlook seminar to Billings this morning. This year's focus is on the COVID-19 pandemic and the impact on the state's economy. Data from the UM Business Research Center shows employment growth in the state in 2020 fell off a cliff.
We had 3.5% decline in jobs in Montana in 2020. And mind you, that is a combination of double-digit declines in the spring, followed by nearly double-digit increases in the fall. On net, a large decline. What do we expect in the future? Well, we expect there to be a pretty strong bounce back.
Barclay says women have been affected most in terms of unemployment. In February 2019, women accounted for roughly 20% of unemployment claims. That number jumped to 60% in April and May of 2020. In January of 2021, those numbers started to normalize, but are still at historical highs. Barclay says some of the sectors in Montana that account for the most jobs lost include accommodations and food, which report more than 14,000 jobs lost, retail with more than 4,000 jobs lost, and healthcare with just over 3,000 jobs lost. Well, still ahead on the MTN 10 o'clock news here on Q2, a pay raise may soon be reality for Montana teachers, as the state legislators hopes to not only attract but keep more teachers in the state. That story coming up. Then a little later in sports, some unfinished business. The Big Timber girls have championship hopes after falling just short a year ago. We're going to hear more about that in a bit.
From Montana's news leader, you're watching the